Are you a sculpture lover and you're traveling to Florence? If so, you will definitely enjoy your time in the town where some of the major masterpieces of European sculpture are actually displayed for free in the urban space. Let me take you on a walk through the most important sculptures in Florence. In Florence, it is enough to go for a walk between the cathedral and Piazza della Signoria to discover some of the major masterpieces of Italian sculpture. In some cases, you will find the copies displayed in the public space, while the originals will be kept inside the museums for protection. Often, however, the originals are still out there decorating the center of Florence today. Here are my favorite sculptures in Florence. The Gates of Paradise. The Gates of Paradise are a beautiful set of bronze door that were made between 1425 and 1452 to decorate the Florentine baptistry. They were designed by Lorenzo Ghiberti. Today the original is kept inside of the Cathedral Museum, but on the baptistry facing the Florentine Cathedral you can still see the copy. The gates feature 10 big bas-reliefs that narrate the stories of Old Testament. Ghiberti, in his door, used the so-called continuative narrative, which is a method to tell the stories which incorporates the same protagonists within one composition, many times as the story evolves. And so, if you look in the upper left corner, you will see the stories of Genesis. The creation of Adam will be in the lower left corner of the composition. The creation of Eve at the center. The original scene in the backdrop on the left side, and the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the paradise on the very right side of the scene. And so 4 different events actually are located in one frame, and this was a very innovative technique at that time, and that also was made possible thanks to the use of the linear perspective, the geometrical method of projection of depth on surface that allowed Ghiberti to develop the stages, let's say, for his compositions. He also played a lot with the depth of the relief in his doors, creating some figures completely detached from the background, fully three-dimensional, and some other elements being simply sketched on the background in a very flat way. Again, that helped him in the creation of those sets within which he located the protagonists of his stories. Along the main street of Florence, Via Calzaiuoli, stands the monumental building of Or San Michele, today a church with an important painting dedicated to the Virgin Mary on the ground floor that, however, developed from a medieval wheat market. In the second half of the 14th century, when the market was transformed into the church, the local guilds were asked to sponsor the construction of niches decorated by the figures of the patron saints of every single guild. Or San Michele is a textbook on European sculpture. The different statues show the evolution of the style from medieval towards the Renaissance. And here you can find a niche with the famous statue of Saint George designed by Donatello. Today, on the outside of Or San Michele, you will find a copy of this statue, while the original is kept at the Bargello Museum in Florence. The statue of St. George features the early style of Donatello, who is still looking towards the Gothic with the verticality of his composition, whilst already being partly inspired by the classical art. Giorgio almost seems like a Roman orator with wide arms, proudly standing in his niche. Below, however, in the tabernacle, there is a bas-relief representing the scene with St. George saving the princess. There, on the very right side of the composition, Donatello for the first time experiences and examines the possibilities of the linear perspective. The portico behind the princess starts diminishing as it gets deeper in space. This is one of the first examples of the correct projection of space on surface in the European sculpture. During the 1470s, the Tribunale della Mercatanzia, the court that was solving the controversies between the merchants, commissioned Andrea del Verrocchio for the niche for Or San Michele with a statue representing Saint Thomas. Saint Thomas was the saint who did not fully believe in the resurrection of Christ, and so he is testing Jesus, putting his fingers into his wounds, checking if he is really resurrected Christ. This composition is very, very beautiful example of the 15th century Florentine bronze cast. Look at the folds of the dresses, the gestures and the faces of Thomas and Jesus. When Verrocchio was working on this composition, young Leonardo da Vinci was actually working as a pupil in his workshop, and so many features, especially regarding the faces of the protagonists of Verrocchio's statues, are quite similar to the compositions by Leonardo. Outside, on the facade of Or San Michele, you can find a copy of this statue, while the original is kept in the Museum of Or San Michele on the upper floor of the monument. Piazza della Signoria is Florentine square with the biggest number of important masterpieces displayed there still today. One of the first statues that reached the square was Judith and Holofernes by Donatello, designed by the artist in the mid-15th century as a fountain for the Palazzo Medici. The statue was stolen by the people of Florence in 1494, when the people of Florence sent the Medici family to exile. They took the statue that used to decorate the garden of the Palazzo Medici and placed Judith in front of the town hall as a republican symbol. Weak women, Judith, who won against the powerful Holofernes, became for the people of Florence the symbol of the weak Republic of Florence, who manages to win against the powerful Medici. Judith stood there until it was not moved to make space for a bit more famous friend, Michelangelo's David. Today, the original statue is kept inside the Palazzo Vecchio, while on the outside in the square you can find a copy. In front of the town hall you can also see the replica of the famous David by Michelangelo, a statue commissioned in 1501 by the cathedral authorities. Initially, David was meant to be placed on one of the apses of the Florentine cathedral, but David was never put up there on the roof of the church. When the artist finished David in 1504, the people of Florence got crazy. They fell in love with this beautiful artwork and decided to put it in front of the town hall as another republican symbol. Just like Judith, who symbolized the victory of weak Florentines against the Medici, also the meaning of the history of David was carried with the same political significance. Weak young David winning against Goliath became an allegory of this weak state, weak people of Florence who managed to overcome the powerful Medici. And so David became another republican hero in Piazza della Signoria. The statue stood there until 1873, when the government of Florence decided to move it inside of the Accademia Gallery for protection. The replica was made in 1910. Also on the replica you can see the particularity of David's body. It testifies Michelangelo's interest in anatomy and his anatomical studies that he actually made before sculpting David. That nudity is a very, very meaningful element of the sculpture. It symbolizes the perfection of David, his courage, strength, the fact that he's a just and brave hero. All the positive qualities that people of Florence attributed to themselves. They wanted to see themselves as this superhero, perfect David who manages to overcome the enemies. When the Medici family returned to town and the Duke Cosimo I started reinforcing the position of the family, he wanted symbolically fight with the republican David in the square, and so he commissioned Benvenuto Cellini for the figure of Perseus that was placed under the first arch of Loggia dei Lanzi. This statue stands there still today in its original. It's a beautiful bronze work that represents Perseus holding strong in his hand the head of Medusa. Perseus is a real masterpiece of Cellini. Cellini wanted to reach the top levels of the artistic excellence by casting the whole body of Perseus using just one model, one mold. And so, when he managed to obtain this important result, he actually decorated the back of Perseus' head with his own self-portrait. If you look carefully on the back of Perseus' head, you can actually spot a face. The Medici family, because they did not use the loggia next to the town hall as a space for the public assemblies, they transformed it into a museum, a sculpture garden accessible to all. Besides the Perseus by Cellini, on the other side of the loggia they placed the statues by Jean de Boulogne, a famous Flemish artist who became famous with the Italian nickname of Giambologna. Giambologna was particularly interested in the complex compositions based on the torsion, and so his key masterpiece is the famous Rape of the Sabine women that stands on the right arch of the Loggia dei Lanzi. The story refers to the early history of Rome, when the Romans, in order to get wives, attacked and raped the women from their neighbors, the Sabine people. And the composition features three figures. Sabine man, who is trying to protect the Sabine women, who is in the meantime being raped by a Roman. And the whole composition is based on this corkscrew-like torsion and very complicated and complex shape that proved artistic excellence of Jean de Boulogne. He wanted to prove that nothing is impossible for an excellent sculptor. These are my favorite sculptures that are freely accessible in an urban space of Florence. If you want to design your custom itinerary to discover the sculpture history with expert tour guide, contact us. We will be happy to design your private guided tour in Florence.